Test, test. That's on, right?
Yeah.
Go a little higher. All right, everybody. Welcome. My name is Derek Hyra. I'm the director of the Metropolitan Policy Center, and this is part of our Urban Speaker Series. This is our last event in the Urban Speaker Series for the semester. And so our first speaker, Amanda Boston, brought us to Brooklyn. And we learned a lot about the gentrification that was happening in Brooklyn. And then we had Jeffrey Parker, who brought us from Brooklyn to Bridgeport in Chicago. And now we're coming back to New York, but we're not going to New York City. We're going upstate to Newburgh. So we're going to hear about a small-ish town, 60 miles from New York City, and how the gentrification is unfolding there, as opposed to the big city of New York and Chicago. So let me introduce you to our speaker. It is Richard Ocejo, and he is a professor. I have to put my glasses on. I'm getting old. He's not as old as I am, but maybe he'll have glasses. He's got his glasses too. But he's a professor of sociology at John Jay College at CUNY Graduate Center, where he directs the MA program in International Migration Studies. His research focuses on gentrification, culture, race, and space. He is one of the best ethnographers in the country. And his work highlights how neighborhood development and culture come together in different ways to structure social opportunities and social inequality. He has 2 prior Princeton University books, Master of Craft, Old Jobs in the New Urban Economy, which was published in 2017, and Upscaling Downtown from the Barrio Saloons, let me be able to read here, Saloons to Cocktail Bars in New York City, which was published in 2014. Now, beyond writing incredible books, his work has appeared in some of the best journals, Social Problems, Social Perspectives, the Journal of Urban Affairs Review, and Ethnography. Now, Richard is not only a great writer, a great researcher, and a great ethnographer, but he also does a lot of service, academic, professional service. So he is the editor of City and Community, an esteemed urban journal in the US, but also abroad. And he does a tremendous amount of service. Now, some of his service is academic, some of it is professional, like mentoring an old man like me by taking me to the cocktail lounges and the bars in New York City, and maybe every other city that we go and conference at. So he's a good drinking buddy. But let me just tell you, his education, his pedigree, PhD in 2009 from CUNY at the Graduate Center, an MA in sociology in 2005 from Queens College, and a BA in sociology in 2002 from Fordham University. So I have to say, Richard, you are a true New Yorker. That's it. He's schooled in New York. So today we have the privilege of hearing him speak about his latest book, 60 Miles Upriver. Not going to say much about the book because that's what his entire presentation is going to be on. So please help me welcome Richard to MPC and American University.
Wow. Thank you for that intro, Derek. Thank you all for joining. This is great. Really lovely to be here. I'm going to be speaking today, like Derek mentioned, about my forthcoming book. It comes out on April 23rd. So a little less than 3 weeks. I'm very excited. So this is I guess this is a pre-book talk, right? It's like, just close enough. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts about what I'm going to be presenting on here. So here's how I want to proceed. Where do I point this thing?
I think a computer, or maybe that one. Maybe it's not working. Oh, a little technical. It might be a different clicker.
This was working before. Maybe
It was.
Oh,
Make sure it's plugged in. Try to
Not yet.
I can work on that. I can do slides. Yes, sir.
Oh, wait, well, when it's on that, let's see. Yeah, now we're.
Awesome.
Okay.
We got it?
Yeah, now we're good. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. So here's how I want to proceed. I want to give both a broad overview of what the book is all about and also zoom in to discuss a key part of the book's arguments. So I'm going to start by going over some of the central topics and the urban problem that the book is examining. I'll talk about my case and my methodology. I'll talk about my theoretical framework. Then again, I'll zoom in into a data chapter from the book and then just offer some takeaways. So let's dive right in. So this book is about how people use moral orientations with the aid of racial discourses to reframe the controversial process of gentrification in positive terms and to justify their actions toward the process's advancement. So I locate this topic in the distinct setting of a gentrifying small city and link it to a really basic question in urban sociology. And that is that if small cities have the same imperative for economic growth as large ones do, then how do they achieve their economic goals with far fewer resources at their disposal, right? And these things mean like fewer talented workers or businesses, a smaller tax base, a depreciated real estate market, less diverse population, fewer hip amenities and cultural attractions, resources like that is what I mean. And a way that we're seeing small cities grow today is through a distinct form of gentrification that I've identified that it's occurring within city regions. So as large cities are becoming increasingly unaffordable to even the middle class, we're seeing how many urbanites are leaving large metropolitan centers for smaller municipalities where there's more affordable real estate, where there's still proximity and connectivity to a larger city, where there's a degree of that magic formula of size, density, and diversity, and where there's often historic architecture and even an industrial texture to the built environment that many in the urban middle class seek out to maintain their lifestyles and identities. So this is a gentrification story, but it's one that needs some retelling. Gentrification theories, and most of them, are based on conditions in large cities, which begs another question. How does gentrification unfold in a smaller urban context? And here's where I get to the problem that this book analyzes. So gentrification's long had two very strong intertwined associations. So one is with white gentrifiers' appreciation for ethno-racial minority and working class communities. In other words, an appreciation of diversity. And then the other one is with residential and social displacement, specifically of those populations. So combining these associations reveals a key moral dilemma at the heart of gentrification. By choosing to move to racially diverse, lower income communities, gentrifiers put at risk the very people and conditions they appreciate and don't want to displace. And then racial difference between these groups only really kind of compounds this dilemma. Now, small city gentrification's distinct characteristics make this dilemma a lot more pronounced because in small cities, gentrifiers become, as I'll discuss, influential producers of space and very close to the process's initiation and advancement. So I come to some research questions. When gentrification stakeholders, that is, the people who have invested in the process, who support it, and who stand to benefit from it directly, when these folks know about the process's harms toward vulnerable minority groups, what explains their continued optimism toward it? How do they come to identify themselves and gentrification as being morally good? How do these moral ideas shape their behavior and actions within their city? And when racial difference is a factor, what roles do racial meanings play in how they make sense of the process? So this book seeks to reveal the social mechanisms behind the reframing of gentrification as a positive, good process. It examines the moral frameworks that people construct to justify and help advance gentrification processes, and to criticize those actors who they feel impede the city's potential to grow and to develop and prosper. And it considers how these groups navigate race and racial difference and deploy racial discourses in a city with a majority-minority population in ways that suit their needs and fulfill their aims. Finally, the book argues that when small cities revitalize through gentrification, the social and economic stakeholders in the process end up occupying powerful roles that lead them to morally justify their actions, which includes accounting for social difference, especially race, in fundamentally self-serving ways. All right, let's make this more concrete. That was real general there. So let me talk about the case and the method. So the city I studied, as Derek mentioned, is a place called Newburgh. It's located 60 miles, see the title, there you go. It's 60 miles north of New York City in a very scenic region of New York State called the Hudson River Valley. This map, I realize, assumes you know where New York City is, but I assume you're all a bunch of urban scholars and you sort of know where it is anyway. So we have New York City down here, here's the Hudson River, and Newburgh is this marker, red and blue marker right there. It's surrounded by really, in the whole area, hundreds of municipalities of varying sizes and with varying relationships to New York City. So Newburgh itself is roughly square shaped. It's about 4 square miles. It was officially settled by Europeans in 1709. And today it has a population of around 28,000 people. So it stands out in the region for being very distinctly urban in a very northern industrial sense. It has a high population density. It has a gridded street pattern, and it's got very strong industrial legacies, as I'll get to in a second. And it also stands out for having a majority-minority population. So the city is 80% non-white, 50% Hispanic, 30% Black, and only 20% white. So more on Newburgh in a moment. So let me just quickly talk about my methodology. I never know what to show for my method, so I just put a picture of me giving a walking tour to a bunch of students at Vassar College. Anyway, I began this project in February 2017, officially finished it in April 2021. There's a little asterisk there because the final year was, as we know, the pandemic. My trips to the city were very sporadic and a lot of it went online at that point. Most of my data collection was in the first 3 years. Primary data collection techniques here: field work, interviewing, regular visits to Newburgh, spending time at public gathering places, government and community meetings, volunteering for many groups and so on. And I conducted in-depth formal interviews with 144 people. It can be sometimes hard to kind of draw neat boundaries around the people in this study and differentiate. I based this breakdown on primarily where people fall within the analysis within the book. So quick history now about Newburgh. Newburgh was a successful industrial city. It was a manufacturing city for much of the 19th and the first half of the 20th century. Became very famous for its architecture. The Hudson River, which you see is right up there, which connects it to New York City for the shipment of goods. Waterfront was always its really economic heart, the economic engine of the city. And then we have 3 major processes of disinvestment taking place in the mid-20th century that lead to the city's decline. You'll be familiar with these from many other different cities that happened in Newburgh as well. First, we have deindustrialization, the fleeing of manufacturing businesses and jobs. Second was the fleeing of white residents and homeowners to new suburban homes in the region, and in reaction to the influx of Black migrants from the rural South who were moving in and being segregated into the old declining disinvested sections of the city, mostly by the waterfront, commonly known as white flight and the Great Migration. And third was urban renewal. This was the federal program of giving municipalities funding for the demolition of existing buildings and street patterns for the purpose of redevelopment. This was the late 1940s to the early 1970s or so. In Newburgh, the city had destroyed approximately 1,330 buildings in the downtown waterfront area. City leaders and their consultants drew the urban renewal maps around what was then the city's predominant Black area, and 85% of residents who were slated to be displaced were Black. The plans to redevelop this land pretty much fell through across the board, and most of this land remains vacant today. Here's an example, right? So this is all this was a street pattern and buildings and so on. There's a very scenic view over there. Has yet to be redeveloped. Newburgh's decline then, after this, very, very severe rates of poverty, crime, housing insecurity, property abandonments, neglects, all skyrocket. In the 70s, housing preservationists or just historic preservationists managed to create a very, very large historic district from the remaining classical architecture, which became instrumental in its gentrification. I'll get to that in a second. By the 2010s, Newburgh became known as the murder capital of New York because of its per capita crime rate. Its poverty rate today is approximately around 25% of the population who live below the poverty line. It's more than double the national. 61% of renters and 44% of homeowners are considered cost burdened in their housing, meaning they pay more than 30% of their monthly gross rent, monthly gross income on rent or on housing. And it's the negative conditions and the reputation and the disinvestments were really completely intertwined with racism, its minoritized population. Newburgh, especially within the region, became this racialized, disinvested place that many became intertwined and marked by Blackness, poverty, and inferiority. And yet, despite these decades of decline, Newburgh is now home to a gentrifying historic district, an influx of mostly white creative professionals, most of whom are coming from New York City, cool amenities and events, and an expanding creative economy. So let's talk theory here. So the documented reasons in the urban literature for how small cities grow economically, they all fall short in explaining what's happening in Newburgh because we haven't seen a lot of the initiatives that have redeveloped small cities occur there. We haven't seen revitalization through downtown or waterfront or Main Street redevelopment. We haven't seen efforts of anchor institutions such as hospitals or universities or colleges or art museums or anything like that. We haven't seen any economic restructuring such as around tourism, and there haven't been any large-scale economic development projects, the likes of sports stadiums or casinos or anything like that. The one essential factor that explains Newburgh's revitalization is its location within the city region, leading to priced out members of the urban middle class to migrate and potentially gentrify the places that they are moving to. Most importantly, the gentrification process that we're seeing in places like Newburgh, I'm arguing, are unfolding in 4 distinct ways that are different from what we see in the literature occurring in large cities. First, small city gentrifiers are primarily homeowners, not renters. Many are also landlords, business owners, investors, small-scale developers, and collectively very influential placemakers. So individual working artists, I mentioned they're all professionals, mostly within the creative economy. These folks aren't typically in positions of such privilege and power in larger urban contexts. Second, because of their new city's small scale and their new role as stakeholders, they can become very influential civic and political participants, active participants, and shape the city's agenda around projects, policies, and initiatives that suit their interests, especially bolstering the relationship between the creative economy and real estate, thereby furthering gentrification. But quickly, based on these 2 important differences, just to point out how Newburgh's newcomers simultaneously occupy these 4 distinct roles that are often treated kind of separately. So first, they're both displaced from their former city and gentrifiers in their new one. And in addition, they're both well-educated appreciators of urban life or consumers of urban space, as well as property owners, small-scale developers, and civic actors or producers of urban space. So they both have the knowledge of urban revitalization's potential harms from personal experience, and the resources to be able to address them one way or the other. Third, their structural position as privileged property owners puts them in close contact with those existing business owners and property owners, mostly white like them, who share their interest in achieving growth. These are locals, in other words. Lifelong residents, returning residents, people who grew up in Newburgh, left, go to college to work, and then have moved back. People who've been wanting to see Newburgh revitalized for many years. Typically, the economic and cultural interests of these groups, gentrifiers and existing residents, don't really align, but small cities like Newburgh, we see that they do. And finally, small city gentrification connects small cities to large ones in new ways. Gentrification here has launched a regional chain migration and alerted a new set of business and real estate investors, as well as consumers, to the city's market and its cultural amenities. A concept in the geography literature that helps explain this connection is this idea of borrowed size, or when a smaller municipality leverages its proximity to a larger one. So, all right, now we're going to come back to the central puzzle the book's investigating. So how do these gentrification stakeholders reconcile appreciating diversity while knowing that the strength of their embrace may be putting it at risk of displacement by acting out of their own self-interest as active producers of urban space? And how do they do so? How do they do this reconciliation while navigating the sensitive issue of racial difference? So moral, as I'm using it here, is referring to the shared moral meanings and understandings that motivate people's behavior and that shape their ideas and choices. Moral attitudes we've seen have factored into gentrification research in two key ways. The first deals with this question of when a neighborhood gentrifies, whose principles concerning right and wrong behavior, good and bad use, get to shape space, place, and community. Now, research in this tradition looks at competing definitions of moral behavior in neighborhoods and the tensions that arise between typically incoming groups and existing groups from these differences. Now, a second way is through analyses of how gentrifiers make moral sense of the process and their role in it. So these studies focus more on the internal moral struggles that individuals feel from choosing to move to a lower income neighborhood, this idea of being gentrifiers and contributing to a process's advancement. And it does so mainly by examining we've found the rhetorical strategies that gentrifiers deploy to, say, distinguish themselves from bad gentrifiers, or to identify larger scale actors who are making the real contributions to the process. Unexamined, though, is how gentrifiers resolve these moral questions as, again, producers of space, people who are behind the process. So because of their structural position, the book argues that Newberg's gentrifiers reframe the process as morally good for being equitable and for providing a variety of economic and cultural opportunities that will help realize the city's potential, that will reduce poverty, and that will prevent the displacement of these vulnerable groups. These culture-led, market-based opportunities include employment in the creative economy, improved historic housing, and a better quality of life from exposure to art and culture. And I refer to this orientation in the book as the moral frame of opportunity that assigns value to those actors and actions that promote gentrification processes, that removes it from those who impede them, and that incites civic and political behavior. Now, the social factors behind this moral attitude are gentrification stakeholders' exclusive community memberships, occupational community, spatial community as property owners, elective community as having chosen to move to Newburgh, as well as their social class position as property owners, and as I'll get to, their white racial identity that informs how they make sense of race and racial hierarchy. Now, because of this clear racial difference between these stakeholders and existing residents, justifying gentrification by reframing it as morally good also entails navigating and invoking race, which they do through these two distinct racial discourses between which the emphasis of race's salience shifts. So first, they use this idea of a diversity discourse that really lauds racial difference when it can be repackaged as diversity. Under this discourse, the idea that Newburgh is diverse becomes both a description and a moralistic statement that reinforces living among racial difference as a normative value. Second, by reframing gentrification as morally good because it is potentially equitable, supporters of gentrification also use a more explicit discourse of colorblindness in their justification. This discourse asserts that if race is not a factor that impedes one's potential to benefit from gentrification's many opportunities, then it can be overlooked as a problem and shouldn't be cited as a factor. Within this new framing, gentrification becomes a race-neutral form of economic growth and urban development, an equal opportunity that is inclusive and beneficial to all, regardless of race or ethnic or social class background. not an exclusionary process or a factor in escalating property values and rents, not a factor in displacement or in other kinds of everyday displacement, social displacement, political displacement, and so on. Now, importantly, these discourses emerge from a common impulse of reinforcing power structures in which stakeholders occupy dominant positions. They ignore the structural conditions behind racial inequality and the real spatial problems that racial inequality produces in Newburgh. Race gets both repackaged as positive diversity to revalorize urban space and aid gentrification along, and it is rendered invisible when framing gentrification that they control and benefit from as an equitable opportunity granting process. Okay, so don't worry, the date is coming soon. All right, it's coming. So quick about how to break the book down. I just basically gave you most of the introduction there. Chapter 1 examines gentrifiers' motivations for moving to Newburgh and their settlement narratives to show how they use this diversity racial discourse to make sense of the city as a real urban environment. Chapter 2 looks at the lifelong and returning residents who help to facilitate this process. Chapter 3 analyzes those existing residents of color and their advocates who hold a very ambivalent attitude toward gentrification. And then chapters 5 and 6 examine the actions behind how stakeholders produce space to suit their interests and how they oppose policies that they think impede gentrification. And the chapter I want to focus on here, chapter 4, looks at this moral orientation that reframes gentrification as good and that helps justify these efforts. So let's get into it. There's a need for this moral orientation for a couple of reasons. First, as I mentioned, these stakeholders can't shift moral blame for gentrification's potential harms onto other more powerful actors because they are the powerful actors. They are structurally positioned here in this place as the producers of this process. And second, they're very conscious of the moral dilemma of displacing the people who they appreciate and of the racial difference and the power disparities that exist between them and existing groups. Billy, a white 35-year-old furniture maker, highlights this concern in this quote: "I'd love to be able to have a storefront or a gallery that's open a few days a week. And it's not just my stuff, but a few other people's stuff. But there's a huge dilemma because nobody in town would be able to afford that, and I know it. If I want to do something that benefits the community and those people around me, it's going to have to be something that's actually more hands-on, like come to the shop, learn something, be exposed to something you wouldn't be exposed to otherwise, perhaps. Because I still need to be able to showcase goods and sell it somehow. That's not going to benefit the community. I would have a really hard time opening up a storefront and then being like, here's a $12,000 credenza. Like it's kind of a slap in the face," close quote. So as Billy hints at here, the primary way that gentrification stakeholders try to resolve this dilemma is by reframing the process itself as being potentially beneficial. Within this frame, they as gentrifiers are morally good for being the providers of opportunity, in this case by doing something kind of vague but hands-on that offers something like exposure. Their efforts positioned as the thing that will revitalize Newburgh and address the city's problems. And we see how this moral orientation stems from their structural position as business owners, as well as their occupation as creative professionals. As a quick example, I'm just going to read a shortened version of an episode from my field notes. This is one that actually starts the book. "A few blocks past the most gentrified section of the historic district is Lodger." This is it in the photo. "A supper club style restaurant with an underground modern bohemian vibe that has become popular for newcomers. Lodger participates in an internship program with Newburgh's only public high school. The owner selected 3 students for his first cohort, 2 14-year-old ninth graders who identify as Black and Latino respectively, and a 15-year-old Latina in the 10th grade. All 3 were aware of the new shops and businesses in the gentrifying historic district before their internship at Lodger, but had never been inside them. Word about the internship at Lodger spread among Newburghers who are in the know about the happenings in the historic district. Since the program began in September, many of them have been coming by to check it out and meet the students. On a Thursday morning in October, a newcomer to the city named Scotty pays a visit during the students' weekly session. Scotty is a 42-year-old white photographer who moved to Newburgh from Manhattan in 2015. He'd been aware of the city's reputation for crime and poverty, but was not deterred. Like other newcomers, he was drawn to its historic architecture, creative scene, and authentic city feel. So, are you all interested in becoming chefs one day? Scotty asked the students after they put on their aprons and set up their cutting boards. The students exchanged nervous looks. Smiling shyly, one responds, I'm not really sure. As the months go by, a steady stream of visitors pop in on the internship sessions. The students grow accustomed to fielding questions like Scotty's about what the internship might lead to. One morning in February, Mary, a white 46-year-old clothing and textile designer, comes in to drop off some cloth napkins the owner bartered for. After chatting with him for a bit, Mary stands to the side and observes the students as they chop onions. Wow, this is really great, she says. You guys could get a job at the Bistro, referring to the trendy restaurant called Liberty Street Bistro in the thick of the district's most gentrified section. The students were recently given a lesson in knife skills by its chef owner and toured its professional kitchen. As the weather warms, Lodger starts opening for lunch on Thursdays. Phil, a 42-year-old vintage furniture restorer and regular diner at Lodger, comes in from his nearby studio. He compliments the students on the soup they'd helped prepare. How do you plan on using these skills going forward? He asked them between spoonfuls. So throughout the year, newcomers to Newburgh, like Scotty, Mary, and Phil, as well as members of the local press, come in to see the program or to have lunch. They invariably ask the students questions like if they plan to use their experiences at Lodger to work in the food industry, often mentioning Newburgh's new restaurants as possible landing spots. For their part, the students provide the same polite answers of non-commitment or uninterest. Now we see in the story one of the key aspects of this moral frame of opportunity. So to reframe gentrification as beneficial, stakeholders assign value to themselves for providing opportunities for existing residents of color, youth in this case. So employment from an expanding creative economy is an integral example of this. In this vignette, newcomers position Lodger and its internship as a career path opportunity for Newburgh's youth. The key is that if opportunities for lower income people of color to advance themselves are being provided through employment in a gentrifier-led business, then the process itself is not being outwardly harmful. In this way, we also see how the moral frame of opportunity gets expressed with a colorblind racial discourse. As one stakeholder puts it, I want a Renaissance renovation that is all-inclusive, close quote. The opportunities are open to everyone, do not exclude anyone on any basis, and individual residents of color can recognize and take advantage of them. As Max, an architect who works in historic restoration, says, quote, when you come here to Newburgh, it's not just about capturing or preserving what is here, as much as it is transforming or bringing a new industry to the city. And everything here happens organically. Existing residents also start to recognize the value because the change is slower. If things are planned from high above, then it happens too quickly for the people at the ground level to react to. And if it happens slow, if you slow that pace down and people start to realize things are happening, if they actually get a chance to understand what is happening, then they have the opportunity to act, react, engage, participate, and that is more important in the way that Newburgh transforms than worrying so much about its total revolution overnight, close quote. The stakeholders' moral frame promotes the idea that a gentrification process under their control, at their pace, as producers and on their terms, serves as a form of race-neutral urban development, with one calling it an example of urban revitalization through craft. When we use a bit more of a critical lens, we see that these stakeholders are linking their own economic needs and interests with the needs of the community and the city itself. As a dominant group in terms of their racial status and social class status, their needs and interests get placed at the center of a revitalization framed as good for promoting a very general inclusivity and promising equitable results. Market-based initiatives like restaurant work and historic housing restoration get considered moral goods and solutions to Newburgh's problems without factoring in any legacies that still exist of racialized poverty, enduring structures of racial and social class inequality, or how intertwined these cultural initiatives are with the city's real estate values and housing costs. And residents of color who do not take advantage of these new opportunities that their gentrification brings get framed as either expressing a personal choice or exemplifying a moral failure for not using them for upward mobility. Not framed, in other words, as a historically marginalized group or a group that is vulnerable to exclusion and displacement in a place like Newburgh. One more point here that builds off of this last one. So the moral frame of opportunity has a flip side to it. So it assigns and it removes value based on people's orientation toward the gentrification processes. So if gentrification stakeholders frame themselves as morally good for providing opportunity and thereby not liable for the process's harms, they frame existing city officials and other actors in the city as being somehow morally wrong for the processes not progressing as they would like it to, and standing in the way of advancing gentrification. So they use this moral frame to critique what they think is an excessive focus on public policies and initiatives that target low-income communities of color. Guy, a short fiction writer, says it this way, quote, "City council basically just wants to keep Newburgh down and vulnerable so that those vulnerable people will have to come to them to have a voice in their government," is the shortest answer, close quote. And they use the moral frame to make sense of what they think is a lack of support for policies of direct interest to them. Jean, a poet, says, quote, "I'm quite worried about the development projects that are about to happen." She's referring to a proposed affordable housing project, which I'll mention again in a second. "I'm struggling with trying to help educate people on what even good design is. People can't even discern really how something is going to be good and how something is going to be bad, or what's the potential. They don't know that there can be green roofs that are open to the public on all of these buildings, or that there can be a parking lot that's designed to have a park on top of it," close quote. So we're seeing here in the thinking among these stakeholders that Newburgh's democratic leaders are unable to see the city's potential for an alternative path. This is reinforced by city government's focus on policies and projects that help low-income communities, such as affordable housing development. As Walter Luthier says about an affordable housing complex run by a nonprofit that was established around the time he moved to Newburgh, quote, "People made a lot of money on that project. It's unfortunate that you basically have a halfway house on the most prime location in the city. It's not exactly the best use, but that was the only thing kind of going on back then. Today, it's not what Newburgh needs. It doesn't need low-income housing," close quote. So this point here about subsidized affordable housing, part of this larger argument that development paying anything less than maximum market rates and maximum taxes are squandering potential property value and revenue for the city. And I show in a later chapter in the book, chapter 6, how this moral framing has been used and invoked by stakeholders in support of protests against affordable housing, among other policies. The stakeholders see city government officials' inability to enact meaningful growth policies as a moral problem, and the root cause behind gentrification not proceeding or advancing as effectively or efficiently as it should. Ralph, a blues trumpeter, says, quote, "City council lacks self-esteem. The poverty that is here has a certain mentality in the way that politics run and the way things are funded. Government here has issues with trying to get things moving forward," close quote. Stakeholders claim that the needs of low-income residents are already being met by a large reservoir of existing affordable housing units and nonprofit organizations that focus on the effects of poverty. Most importantly, because of the economic opportunities that they are bringing, they feel they can address Newburgh's problems more efficiently than government. It's a basic trickle-down economic argument. A more business-friendly environment should therefore be encouraged. I'll close with this. Jeff, a 3D artist, says, "The city is so primed for development and to turn around if they loosen these tax laws, if they see a huge resurgence of development. Why are they not getting that?" Close quote. So as a way of concluding here, I just want to quickly point out some 3 key contributions that I see this book making, hopefully. First, I wanted to show how scale and regional dynamics are integral to how urban processes like gentrification-led economic revitalization, revalorization, displacement, these sorts of processes, how they all unfold, leading us to have to expand our theoretical understandings that are centered around large urban contexts as our model cases. We see in the case of Newburgh here, for instance, how people who tend to have more liberal, progressive political views in general can also fall very much on a more conservative end of a political spectrum with regard to their city's revitalization when they become direct beneficiaries of that revitalization, as evidenced by their disapproval of public expenditures for marginalized groups, for projects like affordable housing, and their defense of market-oriented initiatives as solutions to structural urban problems. There's a growing need in sociology and urban studies for research of smaller municipalities, as we're seeing an increasing influx of middle-class residents moving to them nationally. Second, hope this book furthers the idea of gentrification as a moral process by deepening analyses into the motivations behind how it gets set in motion and how it gets justified. I'd like this book to open up conversations about the moral implications behind people's housing choices and their local civic actions, and about the responsibilities that people have toward existing residents in the communities where they move to, especially when we see power imbalances like social class and race that are in play. And third, it furthers research into how race is central to gentrification by showing how racial discourses get invoked as both signifiers of spatial value and as justifications and defenses against the process's potential harms. Gentrification is typically characterized as a social class process, which it is by definition, but this book shows the key role racial meanings play in the process beyond interracial conflicts between groups that emerge in many gentrifying places, as important as those are. Racial difference can be positive when repackaged as diversity, or rendered invisible to defend culpability in the process's harms. Both examples use race to support gentrification's advancement. So the book addresses these larger questions like, can the structural forces that helped create a decline, in this case, the intertwined forces of racial hierarchy, racialized space, and market-based real estate, reverse it without acknowledging and addressing their inherent problems of inequality and racism? Can a dominant group put their needs and interests at the center of a revitalization and still achieve equitable growth? I hope this book helps advance some of these needed conversations, and I hope you all enjoy it, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we've got 15 to 20 minutes for questions. You know, I said how good Richard was as an ethnographer and as a writer, but I should have said also as a presenter. That presentation was excellent.
Thank you.
So let's just throw it open for questions. Richard, I'm going to let you facilitate,
Yep.
call on people.
Absolutely.
I'm going to go get a cookie. And,
Go get a cookie. They're really good.
but questions?
The cookies are good.
Do you have like a connection to Newburgh? Why do you choose it? And then if you don't, how do you gain interest?
Yeah, great question. So I do not live in Newburgh, but I live nearby. I live in the region. So I am very, very similar to a lot of the people who I studied, in the sense that I lived in New York City my whole life, born and raised there, and couldn't afford to stay, got priced out, decided we were gonna, whatever, my wife and I decided we were gonna move to the Hudson Valley. I knew about Newburgh. I knew about its reputation from having family who live in the county when I was growing up, and you know, would hear a lot of very negative things about it, and then didn't think much about it when we were going to look to move there. But we just decided not to live in a city. We didn't want to live in a city again, an urban environment. So we moved to the small town that we live in and decided we were going to go to Newburgh to visit and to check it out, because we had heard about it. And it just immediately piqued my interest when I first started hanging out there, because it was quite, it looks like the way I describe it in the book, like a section of Brooklyn were carved out and airlifted, you know, 60 miles north, because there was clearly a process going on there, change, a revitalization process going on there. And so I just kind of kept going and hanging out and talking to people, and that's how the project really started. Yeah, I found myself an urban scholar who didn't live in a city. So I needed a new project at the time. And that just sort of fell on my lap a little bit. Cool. Yeah, that's how it started. Hey.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the ideas that you brought in. I think the irony of, the displaced becoming the gentrifiers is really interesting. I have two questions. My first is I'm interested by the scenario you gave at the beginning with the internship and the students kind of politely deflecting. You did a good job, fleshing out the perspective of the gentrifiers and how they feel like, oh, we're getting these opportunities. In your interviews or in just your experience there, did you get a sense for why the kids were not really or like why the opportunity was mismatching with the population, sort of what their thoughts were?
Yeah. Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. So I mean, from I helped this internship for a year, so I got to know these kids really well. The short answer is they were 14. Like they don't. This is a high school requirement. They want to talk about soccer and K-pop. Like one of them, I have a quote in the book where one of them says, I'm helping my mom make dinner at home. Like, I'm not picking a career. Like, this is not intended for us to do that.
Sure.
And they understood that, and they didn't feel the pressure to, except from these folks, to have to say that this is somehow a path. It's just meant to be a learning opportunity of some sort that they could do. And they had opportunities to pick a law firm and a local newspaper, a doctor's office. There's a variety of businesses in the city and the region that participate in this program. They thought this was going to be fun, basically. So, yeah, that was their specific reaction to it. Yeah.
And then my second question, gentrification is not my area, so I'm new to the theory. I am in Derek's qualitative class, but with sort of a different area of interest. Is there for a small city, I understand most studies have been in larger cities. Is there an ideal way for gentrification to sort of unfold that is more equitable? What role, I guess, particularly for the long-standing population, what role would be more ideal for them?
Wow.
Yeah, sorry.
Huge. No,
is there another case study of development happening in a more equitable way?
There are studies of that. Yeah, there are studies of what economic impacts or what impacts on housing costs or costs of living or local services that, not even just gentrification, but any kind of major revitalization projects could have. And that's a huge conversation, and that is really big. It's a big, I don't know if there's no ideal model. I'll say that, right? There isn't that one model of a large case in which we see an outcome that is favorable to all parties involved, let's say, that I can point to and say that this is what we have, examples of, say, dialogue and open communication between existing residents and their advocacy groups and so on, and newcomers. Often those, again, are in large cities and very piecemeal and very case by case, and often very much based on the initiatives of a few enterprising residents, individuals. There are obviously ways for municipal governments to get involved and to create policies that can mitigate harms against something like escalating housing costs or escalating rents. But I'll say something too, that the book, it's a fantastic question, and I want a goal of the book to be to inform conversations around what those sorts of policies might look like. The book itself doesn't have any specific suggestions or possible guides or models to follow for what that could be. That's kind of by choice. I think it's trying to present that this is such a complicated problem that involves the relationships between race and real estate that is going to be very difficult to solve by adopting some existing models that may have worked in one neighborhood in one place or something like that. But that's a great question. It's huge.
Well,
It's a
you
huge
can see
topic.
how much I don't know about the
No,
field,
it's
but
huge.
it's a good question.
It's a great question. Yeah. Hey.
I was struck by like the example of like the guy saying, we don't need any affordable housing or low income housing. And it seems like you were trying to show us like the people moving in versus like the established city council. And this was like a few years ago, I guess. So like my question is today, like what are the dynamics like, or from what you know? Obviously you're not researching as much anymore.
No, that's a great question, especially because we did have obviously the pandemic that happened, and it's not in the book deliberately because I didn't want to do even more work on that. But it was, I think, in January, the city council, I'm not doing research there anymore, but to the extent that I can keep up on the news, they had to declare a housing affordability emergency, which allows them to freeze rent increases temporarily for renters. So there's a severe affordable housing in a lot of places, but in the New York City metropolitan area, in the Hudson Valley, in Newburgh, that has forced city government to take direct action. Yeah, no, it's a major issue there. Housing affordability is a major issue in Newburgh. The pandemic accelerated a lot of what was already happening. You had that mass exodus from a lot of large cities as people went to remote work, and anybody who could afford to leave and wanted to leave did so either by getting a second home or by making that move that they might have made anyway in a few years, just did it a little sooner. And real estate in Newburgh became, it was a white hot real estate market, and it's only recently cooled down. So Newburgh was very much a destination for people who had already known about it because it was on New Yorkers' mental maps by then. The groundwork had already been laid, and it was very ready to receive a large influx of people. So the pandemic pushed the fast forward button, I would say, on what was likely to happen, I would say, over the next 5 years, happened in 2.
You talked about how small Newburgh was. Were there any how do you think the size of Newburgh in comparison to like a bigger city factors into like the processes of gentrification that occurred? I'm wondering, is that touched on the book, or how does that?
Absolutely. So the way that it factors in with the scale of it is in really 2 key ways. So the first is in the affordability of real estate there. So the scale of it combined with, not just the scale, but combined with the decades of disinvestment and just decreasing property values that are there, which was very much racially informed, makes Newburgh and a lot of other small municipalities far more affordable to people with a certain amount of spending power, but certainly compared to larger cities. So this allows different actors in real estate to get involved in a major process of change, not just at the housing level or the house level, let's say, or even the street level, but potentially neighborhood and city level. When you look in a large city and you say, oh, that neighborhood is gentrified, we mean a couple of streets where you visibly see a change. In Newburgh, I mean, they all say this, like in New York City's a monster. You can't figure it, no one can figure it out. There's nothing any group of people in a neighborhood can do to really make any significant change there. 100 people in Newburgh can make a big change. You can shift the political agenda of the city itself, not just what's happening on this street or what's happening in this neighborhood, let's say. You could create a voting block. You could now get certain projects on, say, the Economic Development Committee's agenda that weren't on there before, that never would have been on there before. So that chapter I mentioned, chapter 6, which was the last time city government tried to create a new affordable housing project, and it failed. It was vigorously protested by this group. And the city has yet to try to revive it or to bring in a new create new affordable housing. All that they've done since then is private developments. So that's a market shift that you just don't see happen at that speed in a large city. It just won't happen. So on one is there's the affordability of it that scale has helped create, and scale provides greater opportunity for fewer people to really kind of shape the trajectory that place is going to take. It doesn't take as much, right? It doesn't take as much for that to happen. At best, some gentrifiers can change a street in a large city, right? Maybe 2, and then the bigger real estate actors will come in, and then you'll see bigger changes. In a smaller place, and not just a small city, but towns, rural areas where we see this happening. It doesn't take many people, right? Just people who have some capital, not capital that'll go very far in a large city, but in a smaller place, it can make a big difference.
I'm kind of curious more about like the moral justification that a lot of these newer residents had.
Mhm.
And I know I forget the phrase you coined for it, but I remember it was like economic opportunity,
Mhm.
arts and culture. And I was kind of curious on that latter part. Did they just envision themselves as like hip and trendy and coming in and they're gonna uplift all these people with their I was kind of curious how you explored that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad you put it that way. Like, did they come there with that idea? Because it's not like that's why someone asked me this once in like the kind of white savior sense. They're not going there for that purpose. They're going there for themselves. They're going there because they can't afford to upgrade where they live in New York City. They can't afford to cement that middle class status by owning a home in New York City. It's unaffordable to them. So they choose to go to a place like that because it's affordable for them, and it still contains that urban feel to it. It's still a city. It's super small compared to where they were. It's not as diverse, but it's diverse enough. Not as dense, but it's dense enough. And it allows them to still maintain that urban identity. And that's why they go there. Once they get there, that's when they discover the problem. Like, oh, wait a second, we're doing this again. We're part of the gentrification process in New York City. Not only are we part of one again, but we're in charge of it. What do we do? Or how do we handle that? Well, what do we got? Well, we got a bunch of art skills. I know. Let's expose them to the ways of how to restore furniture. Let's expose them to the ways of how to make Moroccan cuisine in the restaurant and so on. So that becomes something that they go toward and use as part of that framework, that moral orientation, that what we're doing here is actually part of something that is positive and beneficial. But they're there primarily for themselves. The uplift part, that's constructed and folded into what they use to try to justify what's going on there and keep it going. It's not their motivation for being there. But it could be in other places, but not it is in other places, but not here. But I'm glad you put it that way. Thank you. So you check swing.
The last two, unless someone has a burning third one they want to ask, but go ahead.
Do you think like part of this is just like a lack of like cultural understanding? Like, because I feel like to me it's like sounding like these people are like coming in and they don't realize that like there's other people there too, and then like the city's like shifting away from those like other cultural identities.
I think I'm going to go by what they say. right? I think that so they're not there to understand people. Like they're not there because they have a cultural appreciation for like Professor Hiro's last book, right? In which people wanted to go to the historically Black neighborhood to appreciate the history of Black culture in that place. They're not there for that. This is not for any kind of cultural appreciation or any kind of cultural understanding or anything like that. Only for being exposed and surrounded by diversity itself. That's all they really care about. They just care about it as like a backdrop to the urban sort of lifestyle and so on. But your question was more about.
I just feel like, I'm just kind of going off like what you're saying now, it's like, I just feel like that like, maybe is what is causing like further problems. It's just like,
Well, I think it's like their class interests and racial identity are preventing them from truly seeing
the beauty of the city.
This-
and,
well,
like, the people there.
or from understanding just what the structural divides are that prevent them from really understanding what the problems are and what their relationship is to those problems, I would say. I mean, they don't get involved. I mean, yeah, no, I mean, right. They have friends. They're friendly. Like there's not a lot of open tension or conflict that I've noticed or that people have said to me. I mean, but there isn't a lot of true desire to get to understand someone else's situation, I guess. So yes,
Yeah,
I don't want to dump on them because
yeah. I get that.
I was gonna say something about that. It kind of just seems like they're not trying to like understand how to like best help like the minority groups. Like instead of like talking.
no, that's not
to
that.
them,
No,
But like, so it's like unintentionally like kind of like a white savior complex where like I'm providing you with this opportunity. So it was like when you
I see
gave
what
the
you're saying.
example of
Yeah.
the internship, it's like these people kind of coming in and deserving, and then like minorities like feeling uncomfortable because like, cool,
Yeah.
I understand you're helping me out with this, but at
Right.
the same time, it's like I don't want to do.
And
I'm
they're-
doing that like because I need to do it,
right,
and so it's just like they're like, well, we're helping you, so you should just do
right.
it. So that's what it kind of seems like, instead of like trying to get a deeper understanding of like their culture and like who they
Yeah.
are and how to best help the community, instead of
Yeah,
like thinking they know how to help when they don't.
you're right. So like chapter 3 is the chapter, the voices of the existing residents of color they're in the book. They're not the focus of the book. Chapter 3 is where most of that discussion takes place, and they feel that.
Yeah.
So the students, for instance, they don't show up again in the book. I don't want to bring they're the kids, you know, that kind of thing. But the other folks who I do include in the book, they feel that that's how they're treated. So there's an example of a activist or community. What is he? He works for a community-based organization, but he's like an activist in the Latin American immigration community. And you know, he said, yeah, they say they want to be inclusive. They say they want us to get involved and so on. They occasionally put up a poster in Spanish or something like that. They ask us about doing they tried to set up a farmer's market, and they encouraged us to come and so on. It's like the farmer's market is on Wednesdays from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. He's like, that's not when folks shop. That's when artists shop, because they got nothing else to do. Every day is a half day anyway. You can just go buy a muffin at the farmer's market and some zucchini. He's like, they were upset. How come no one came? How come no one in the Latin American community came? How come? And they came to him and said, how come no one? He's like, you didn't ask them when they want to shop, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, they react that way. Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, I think that's the.
Well, yeah, I can keep going.
question.
I'm good.
No, we have to break.
Yeah, I
We'll
got
have
it.
it.
You got to
But,
turn the.
first, let's thank Richard for a great presentation
Thank
and
you.
discussion.
Yeah, for you.
Oh, hey now.
And the book is 60 Miles Upriver. It comes out in 3 weeks.
Less
You can pre-order it.
19 days.
I was thinking of a new title for it based on the discussion.
Right?
Taylor Swift.
It's too.
I'm the problem, it's me. We've just been talking about the newcomers coming in. I'm thinking they're helping, but they're kind of a problem. So maybe they should just admit, the problem is me. Could be a
Smart
subchapter.
woman. She's a smart woman.
Anyway,
She got it.
thanks, everybody. This is the last Urban Speaker Series event of the year, but we have the annual spring lecture. Tom Segru from NYU, another New Yorker, is coming up here, or coming down here to DC, and he's going to be presenting on the uprisings and the unrest and trying to unpack the 1960s and how is it similar or different to what happened in 2020 with the killing of George Floyd. It will be in this room. It will not be on Thursday. It'll be Wednesday, April 24th at 5:30. So we'd love to see you back here for another stimulating conversation. Thanks, everybody. If you're in my class, you break for 10 minutes. You know the drill. We're back here and we're going to talk with Richard.
Is that all right?
Great.